Jack Hales, tall and graceful, is the soul of the saints, Mary's parish. From a young age, he showed a strong devotion to religion, and after graduating from seminary, he returned to his hometown to begin his pastoral career. Within the parish, Jack earned the respect of the congregation through his selfless dedication and profound wisdom. He was not just a preacher, but also a patient listener. Everyone in the parish felt comfortable sharing their inner struggles and concerns with him. As a pastor, Jack understood the importance of family and marriage within faith. He often spoke about the responsibilities of family and the power of love in his sermons. Whenever a couple faced difficulties in their relationship or a family member was struggling, Jack would personally visit them, offer advice, and help them find a way out of their troubles. In his eyes, no difficulty was insurmountable when tackled with faith and communication. He cared deeply for every member of his congregation and would often sacrifice his own personal time to help those in psychological distress find hope in life. Jack's daily life was busy yet fulfilling, as he constantly provided counseling for the faithful, focusing on their marriages and family issues. He became a moral role model in the eyes of the community. Everyone believed that wherever Jack went, he would bring peace and hope. This respect gave him immense influence within the small town. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more in-depth content behind the scenes. Erica Jensen, a young nun just 18 years old, came from a devout Catholic family. Growing up under the influence of the church, her faith was deeply rooted. Erica's family had been dedicated to the church for generations, with her parents being well-known and respected members of the congregation, always involved in charitable activities. Erica's beauty was understated. She had deep blue eyes, a gentle face, and an angelic smile. Despite her youth, she exuded a graceful and humble aura. Wearing her simple nun's habit and walking through the church, every movement of hers seemed particularly modest and dignified. Erica's heart was filled with reverence for God and a strong commitment to her religious faith. From a young age, she dreamed of becoming a nun and dedicating her life to a life of purity and service. She firmly believed that only through serving God could she find true peace and fulfillment. Although still young, Erica had already found strength in many stories from the Bible and teachings of the church, believing that through discipline and a devout life, she could come closer to God's will. When Erica first encountered Pastor Jack Hales, she felt a deep admiration for him. It was a chance meeting during a church service, and Pastor Hales's sermon deeply moved her. His gentle voice and wise eyes instantly gave Erica a sense of connection she couldn't quite describe. She realized that Jack wasn't just a preacher, he was someone who could guide others towards spiritual enlightenment. Erica silently promised herself that she wanted to learn from him, to understand God's will more profoundly, and become a better nun through his guidance. She prayed to God, hoping that one day Pastor Hales would become her mentor, leading her on a deeper spiritual journey. Erica's admiration and reverence for him gradually took root in her heart, and she believed that the pastor's wisdom and compassion would guide her to a brighter future. Erica Jensen had grown up in a devout Catholic family, where family gatherings were always centered around the glory of God and faith. However, this time, she had a different idea. She decided to invite Jack Hales, the priest, to officiate at the family prayer ceremony. Erica believed that not only would it make the family gathering more solemn and sacred, but it would also give her a chance to engage in a deeper conversation with the priest. Although she knew that, as a nun, she should maintain a strict distance from the priest, her inner desire led her to make this decision. That evening, Father Jack arrived at Erica's home, dressed in a simple black priest's robe. His expression was serious, but still warm. Erica greeted him respectfully, but her heartbeat quickened involuntarily. Although he was a respected priest in the church, Erica could not ignore the emotions rising within her. She noticed that the priest seemed somewhat uneasy, his gaze occasionally lingering on her. Every time their eyes met, an unspoken attraction filled the air, creating an almost indescribable tension between them. During the family prayer ceremony, Jack led everyone in prayer with a calm yet powerful voice, filled with the sense of holiness. However, after the prayer, there was a brief moment of silence during which Erica and the priest accidentally locked eyes. It was as if time stood still in that instant. Erica's eyes were filled with reverence and longing, while Jack's gaze was deep and complex. The emotional collision between them was sudden, almost overwhelming. Although they both knew that as clergy their actions had to fully comply with the Church's moral standards and guidelines, the unspoken attraction they felt in that moment was undeniable. Jack's inner turmoil grew more intense in that moment. He was a devout priest, and his faith had always been the guiding principle of his actions. However, facing Erica's pure yet longing gaze, he felt his inner defenses beginning to crumble. Every exchange of glances was like a collision of souls, and he felt his internal conflict intensifying. He wanted to maintain a distance from Erica, but couldn't ignore the irresistible pull of attraction. Erica also felt a deep sense of contradiction. She admired Father Jack. He was not only her spiritual mentor, but also the light she longed for deep inside. However, as a nun, she knew she should not develop any feelings for the priest that went beyond religious admiration. Yet, every time she locked eyes with Jack, her heart raced uncontrollably. That fluttering sensation pulled her deeper into a place she could not escape from. Although both of them knew that this relationship was forbidden, even taboo, the spark between them had quietly ignited, impossible to extinguish. In that moment, both Erica and Jack realized they had already stepped onto a dangerous, irreversible path. That night, Jack Hales, the pastor, was filled with an indescribable inner conflict and pain. After the gathering, Erica's parents, both elderly, left the living room early to rest, leaving her and Jack alone. In the quiet atmosphere, Jack thought several times about leaving, but each time he was drawn back by Erica's gaze. Her eyes were soft yet filled with longing, as if silently calling him. "Pastor, please stay the night here. It's so late outside." Erica's voice was gentle, tinged with nervousness, and held an unspoken expectation. Jack's heart had already been in turmoil. He knew this was wrong. As a pastor, he had sworn to live a life of chastity and lead his followers along the righteous path. Yet every glance from Erica, every gentle invitation, shook his resolve more and more. Jack didn't answer for a long time. His eyes lingered on Erica's face, torn between loyalty to his faith and an undeniable attraction to her. That attraction felt like an invisible chain binding him tightly. Erica's silent admiration made him feel an irresistible temptation. Her purity, her faith, and the look in her eyes, as if she had been born for him, slowly eroded his reason. Finally, Jack gave up his internal struggle and decided to stay the night in this peaceful home. He and Erica walked into the guest room, and after a simple good night, the room fell into silence. However, deep in the quiet of the night, Jack felt an uncontrollable impulse. He approached Erica, gently took her hand, and on her face appeared a trace of shyness. Yet she did not resist. At that moment, Jack knew they had crossed the forbidden line. His heart was filled with guilt and unease, but the tension of emotions had already overpowered his reason. In that instant, all the vows, all the commandments, seemed like shattered glass, losing their meaning. Erica also seemed to fall into a deep confusion. She wasn't sure why she made this choice, and the intertwining of her faith and desires left her heart in turmoil. The next morning, when the sunlight filtered through the curtains and filled the room, Jack awoke, his heart heavy with guilt. He looked down at the intertwined hands of him and Erica, and a wave of remorse surged within him. He knew he had broken his vows, and he knew he had strayed from the duties of a pastor. His faith had become fragmented, and the self-reproach was suffocating. When Erica awoke that morning and saw the apologetic look in Jack's eyes, her heart also fell into a deep, unspoken confusion. She couldn't understand why she had made such a choice in that moment. She had always thought she was pursuing pure faith, but now she could not escape the inner confusion. Her admiration for Jack and her devotion to her faith had become more complex and contradictory. Neither of them spoke, their hearts burdened with conflict and guilt. Jack knew they had entered a path from which they could not turn back, and Erica understood that the events of that night could change her life forever. Despite the heavy weight in their hearts, the attraction and deep emotions between them continued to burn like a flame, one that neither could extinguish. Joseph Jensen woke up early, intending to prepare for Sunday service at the church. But as he passed by Erica's room, he suddenly stopped. He sensed something was off. The door was slightly ajar, and the usual liveliness in the room was replaced with an eerie silence. He hesitated for a moment but decided to approach and investigate. As he pushed open the door, his eyes quickly scanned the room and immediately fell on an unusual sight. Jack Hales, the priest, was lying on Erica's bed, and the two of them were still nestled together. Joseph's heart skipped a beat as anger and shock swept over him like a storm. He could hardly believe his eyes. Such a betrayal was beyond anything he could have imagined. His fury erupted immediately, his heavy footsteps pounding toward the bed, and he shouted angrily, "How dare you? How could you do this?" Jack opened his eyes in a panic, seeing Joseph's enraged face. A cold chill ran through him, and his face turned pale. He scrambled to get up from the bed, but guilt and fear had completely taken over his mind. Erica also woke up, and upon seeing her father's furious expression, a look of despair and shame crossed her face. She felt as though she had been abandoned by the whole world, filled with guilt and fear. "Priest, explain this to me right now." Joseph's voice was low but filled with power, every word coming out through gritted teeth, his eyes full of uncontrollable anger. "What have you done to my daughter? You've tarnished her. You've tarnished the sanctity of the church." Jack's heart raced, his body freezing as if drenched in ice-cold water. His face turned pale, and he fumbled to get up, but guilt and fear engulfed him. He knew that his mistake would not only destroy him, but also bring shame to the entire community and the church. At that moment, Joseph's fury made him feel like he had lost everything. His trust, his job, and even his faith were all gone. I really shouldn't have, Jack stammered, his voice weak, his mind in a state of chaos. He understood that his error was beyond redemption, and it would bring disgrace to not just himself, but to everyone around him. Joseph glared at him, his eyes filled with unspeakable pain and anger. He stepped closer to Jack, his voice low and threatening. "You'd better take responsibility for what you've done, or you'll pay the price." Faced with the fury of Erica's father, Jack knew there was no turning back. If what had happened were exposed, he would lose not only his position in the church, but also his entire life and reputation. At this moment, Jack's mind raced with a sense of despair. He realized that if he did not completely resolve the situation, he would be caught in the center of this storm. In the midst of overwhelming fear and anxiety, an extreme thought flashed through Jack's mind. He knew that only by eliminating the problem in front of him would he have any chance of escaping the wrath of this situation. In the immense pressure, and on the brink of collapse, Jack suddenly grabbed the scissors on the table and, without hesitation, stabbed them into Joseph's chest. The piercing sound was accompanied by the tearing of flesh, and Joseph fell to the ground in pain, blood quickly gushing out, staining the floor. Joseph's body gradually lost strength, and he eventually stopped breathing. His eyes were filled with an incomprehensible shock, as if he was still trying to understand what had just happened. Erica stood frozen, staring at her father lying in a pool of blood. She was rigid, as if frozen by the cold air. Her eyes were wide open, her face written with shock and disbelief. It seemed as though everything that was happening was beyond her comprehension. She could not understand how the priest she had loved could commit such a horrific act. Her heart was filled with fear and confusion. At that moment, Erica's mother heard the noise from outside and rushed into the room. Upon seeing the horrifying scene, she was instantly stunned, but Jack had already fallen into an extreme frenzy, unable to control his emotions any longer. His heartbeat quickened, and reason had completely collapsed. Everything around him seemed unimportant. He turned to face Erica and her mother with only one thought in his mind. There could be no witnesses left. In an instant, Jack's madness completely erupted. He rushed at Erica's mother and mercilessly killed her as well. Then he turned towards Erica, his eyes filled with endless despair and coldness. Erica remained in shock until the very end, slowly losing consciousness, collapsing in a pool of blood. Her expression still held an unbelievable look, as if, even in death, she could not believe the cruel reality before her. After everything happened, Jack was filled with fear and despair. He knew he couldn't stay at the scene and had to leave quickly. He grabbed a coat from the house, hurriedly put it on, and, with his emotions still unsettled, rushed out of the Jensen home. He didn't look back. He just ran, as if trying to escape from the morals and vows he once believed in. He knew that only by disappearing completely could he avoid everything being exposed. At the same time, Margaret, the neighbor of Erica, noticed something unusual. She walked to the Jensen's door and found it unlocked, the curtains drawn low, and the house eerily quiet, as though something was off. She knocked on the door, but got no response, and her unease began to grow. Eventually, she dialed the police, reporting the suspicious situation. After receiving the call, the police quickly arrived at the scene. The moment they entered the house, they discovered the horrific scene, blood everywhere, several bodies violently killed inside. After an initial investigation, the police confirmed it was an extremely violent crime. Though there was no direct evidence pointing to Jack, his close relationship with the Jensen family made him a prime suspect in the investigation. However, Jack had carefully covered his tracks. There were no fingerprints left behind, nor any obvious clues. Throughout his escape, he remained alert, knowing each step he took could determine his fate. As a result, the police investigation hit a dead end, and Jack seemed to vanish without a trace, becoming an elusive part of the mystery. The police, after conducting a thorough investigation of the Jensen household, began to uncover several clues that pointed to Jack. First, they found faint bloodstains in one corner of the house, which stretched from the room out into the hallway, clearly left by someone who had hastily fled the scene. Further analysis revealed shoe prints near the bloodstains, which caught the attention of the investigators. More importantly, the police found clear fingerprints on a pair of scissors at the crime scene. After conducting a comparison, the fingerprints were confirmed to belong to Jack Hales, the pastor. Additional lab analysis matched the fingerprints with other physical evidence found at the scene, marking a significant breakthrough. With these pieces of evidence, the police began to speculate that Jack might have committed the murders in a panic to silence the witnesses, fearing his illicit relationship with Erica would be exposed. Clearly, Jack was overwhelmed with fear, and it seemed that he believed the only way to keep his secret safe was by eliminating all potential witnesses. His violent and bloody actions aligned with this theory. As the investigation progressed, the police closed in on Jack's whereabouts. Under the mounting pressure, Jack began to show increasing signs of anxiety and inner conflict. He started to avoid questions, steering clear of direct contact with the investigators. During one conversation with the police, his words betrayed an unmistakable unease and nervousness, and the officers began to sense that he was hiding more than he was willing to admit. The truth of the case seemed to be slowly coming into view, but Jack continued to maintain control over his emotions, preventing the police from gathering enough direct evidence to arrest him. Jack Hales, the pastor, initially denied all the charges after his arrest. He repeatedly emphasized that he was just a devout pastor, dedicated to serving the church and community, and could never commit such a gruesome crime. He claimed that the evidence was nothing more than a coincidence. However, as the investigation deepened, more and more evidence pointed to Jack. Bloodstains, fingerprints, shoe prints, and even witness testimonies, all of which left him no room to defend himself. In court, Jack still refused to confess. He tried to justify his actions, claiming that the events of that night were due to extreme pressure and inner turmoil, believing that he was influenced by God's calling and Erica's admiration. Jack struggled to convey his inner pain to the judge and jury, hoping for some leniency. However, no matter how much he argued, the cold, unforgiving evidence and the horrifying facts presented in court made his defense seem weak and ineffective. After weeks of intense confrontation, the court finally made its ruling. The court found Jack Hales guilty of manslaughter and sentenced him to life imprisonment, taking away his freedom forever. Jack stood in the courtroom, listening to the verdict with a blank expression, his heart filled with despair and regret. Once he had been respected as a pastor, trusted and admired by many, but all of that had become the past. No matter how he struggled or explained himself, in the end, he could not escape the harsh legal consequences and the unerasable guilt deep inside his soul. Jack Hales's fall from grace became an indelible lesson. He went from being a highly respected pastor to ultimately becoming a criminal, losing everything. The crimes he committed forever changed not only his life, but also the lives of those who had once trusted him. Jack Hales, after being sentenced, saw his life completely change. He was no longer the respected and trusted community leader, but a man imprisoned behind bars. The once adoring congregation now looked at him with disappointment and anger, and the followers who had once held him in high regard could not accept his fall from grace. His role as a priest, once a symbol of honor, became a symbol of shame. In prison, Jack endured each day with a growing sense of internal turmoil and regret, realizing he had lost everything, including the trust and respect of those who had once looked up to him. Erica's family was also plunged into endless grief. Her parents were brutally murdered, and Erica herself met a tragic fate. The entire family was shattered, leaving their loved ones in irreplaceable pain, and the community was left with deep scars. A once warm and devout family was now reduced to sorrow and emptiness. The collapse of faith was not just Jack's personal issue. Erica had once viewed Jack as a spiritual mentor, and in the wake of these tragic events, her faith and ideals crumbled, taking away the last shred of hope many had placed in religion. This story shows us the fragility of power and trust, revealing the complexity and tragedy of human nature. A person once highly respected fell so far due to a moment of impulse and desire, causing irreparable harm to countless people. Faith can bring strength, but when power is abused, it can also become a sharp blade that cuts everything apart. This is a story of vigilance and reflection, reminding us to remain clear-headed and cautious when faced with any form of authority.